This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. A bunch of the news that's going on right now. It turns out that 2 weeks ago, Paul Manafort, the guy who used to work in Ukraine, who was the first, I don't know what the title was, the head of the Trump campaign, president of the campaign or chairman or whatever. I don't know. Nobody knows here. Anyway, whatever it was. That Manafort, the feds did a no-knock search. They basically, this is where, you know, they show up and kick in the door or some variation on that. And they typically only do this when this is a pre-dawn raid, in fact. The sun wasn't even up. They typically do this kind of thing when they fear that there is a possibility that evidence will be destroyed or when they're trying to seriously intimidate somebody. And, you know, my guess would be that there's an element of both here. Maybe trying to get Manafort to flip and you know, spill the beans on others in the Trump administration. I don't know. We'll see. But keep an eye on this spot. I mean, it's just now being reported, but this happened 2 weeks ago, and that's a big deal. Betsy DeVos's brother, Eric Prince, had a meeting with Donald Trump and friends where he made this sales pitch of, even though he's hiding out in another country nowadays most of the time, he's a major Republican donor, major Trump donor, his sister's in the cabinet, all this kind of stuff. And he's like, hey, we've got airplanes, we've got soldiers, we've got a mercenary army for you. We could take over the war in Iraq or Afghanistan, excuse me. And the Pentagon has just said, no, we're not going to do that. Just a quick heads up, I got a note from Ken Chestik, the chair of Wyoming Promise, and he's talking about how they're working on trying to, in Wyoming, work on the idea of a constitutional or not a convention, but a constitutional amendment that says that corporations aren't people and money is not speech. And the website, if you want to check it out, is wyomingprogress.org. And it looks to me like a pretty good organization. 20 things Mike Pence did when you weren't looking and why it matters. This from medium.com. And it's just, it gives you a pretty good sense of who Mike Pence is, what his values are, what his priorities are. And I'll just very quickly run through this list, and we will be picking up your phone calls in just a minute. But in January, Pence and others lobbied Trump to take hardline positions on abortion, making good on his, forced pregnancy campaign pledges. He has led the charge to advance Trump's policy agenda in general. For example, he tweeted, Obamacare will be replaced with something that actually works, bringing freedom and individual responsibility back to American health care. Yes, you are free to die like a dog in the gutter, and you are individually responsible for your own hospital bills. Oh, Mike Pence, you're so smart. Number 3, he's been vocal about supporting the use of tax dollars to fund religious schools. Again, he tweeted, this is National School Choice Week. POTUS and I are committed to making a great education possible for all our children. In other words, let's take tax dollars and give them to religious zealots. Number 4, in January, Pence met with anti-abortion activists at the White House and delivered a speech at the annual March for Life. This is a guy who is very, very committed to forcing any woman who becomes pregnant under any circumstances to carry that baby to term, even if it means, a risk to her health. One of the more dangerous things that can happen to a woman in her life is to become pregnant. People die from pregnancy. But, Pence doesn't care. He's a man. Number 5, Pence spent much of February selling the nomination of Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court as mainstream. Right. This guy has got probably the most far-right ideology of anybody who's been on the Supreme Court since the 1920s. And Mike Pence, sold him. He cast the tie-breaking vote to put Betsy DeVos in as Secretary of Education. I think most Americans have completely forgotten that. Congress was not willing to make, this right-wing billionaire, brother of Eric Prince, heir to the families that basically own Republican politics in the state of Michigan. This billionaire Betsy DeVos, who's never went to public school, never taught in public school, as far as anybody could tell, never even walked into a public school until she became education secretary, putting her in charge. The guy who was pushing this, and by the way, Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins voted against Betsy DeVos. The guy who was pushing this, Mike Pence, and he cast the tie-breaking vote. In May, he was named the head of the Voter Suppression Commission. Chris Kobach gets all the publicity, but Mike Pence is actually the head of this thing. The so-called Advisory Commission on Election Integrity. How can we suppress more votes of poor people, people of color, older people, and students? Number 8, Pence invited anti-abortion activists to the White House to discuss how to merge their agenda with that of the Trump administration. Specifically asking them, what do you want to see in the American health care bill, right? This was their repeal and replace thing that went down in flames. Later that month, he cast the tie-breaking vote to nullify a Title X rule from the Obama era that Title X funds could be used for family planning. He said, nope, can't do that. Sorry, poor women are not entitled to birth control. If they get pregnant, we will pass regulations forcing the government to require their pregnancy be carried to term. But, so we'll regulate their pregnancy, but we're not going to, offer them birth control pills. Number 10, Mike Pence met with members of the financial industry and championed efforts to roll back Dodd-Frank consumer protections. In other words, he's on the take from the banksters. It's just real simple. He's just a shill for the banksters. Meeting with community bankers at the White House. I said the Choice Act is a common sense bill that repeals Dodd-Frank. Right. Because we all just want to be back under the thumbs of the big banks, right? Even more so than we are already. In May, Pence addressed a Campaign for Life gala. This is the so-called Susan B. Anthony list. Well, not so-called. That's what they call themselves. It's a forced pregnancy group. Number 12, Pence played a role in urging Trump to sign a religious liberty executive order during the National Day of Prayer ceremony. This is, religious liberty is a phrase that the Christian Taliban uses to say we're entitled to tax dollars. Number 13, Pence addressed the first ever World Summit in defense of persecuted Christians. Right, because Christians are so badly persecuted in the United States. 14, to give them some due, some Christians in parts of the world are persecuted. They weren't being persecuted in Iraq. They were protected by Saddam Hussein until we decided to stupidly invade that country. They weren't being persecuted by Bashar al-Assad. They were protected in Syria until we got involved in that. Libya, they were being protected by Gaddafi, but all bets are off now because of the insanity of Republican foreign policy. At the University of Notre Dame, he gave a commencement address saying, he said, far too many college campuses across America have become characterized by speech codes, safe zones, tone policing, administration-sanctioned political correctness, all of which amounts to nothing less than the suppression of freedom of speech. In other words, hey, when our hate speech guys come to your campus, you really should stand up and listen to what they have to say. In May, he started his own political action committee called the Great America Committee. In other words, in May, basically, Mike Pence decided he was going to run for president. Don't tell Donald Trump. He'll get very upset. In June, he was put in charge of space policy. He's raised money for his PAC and other political causes, number 17. Number 18, on June 23rd, he addressed Focus on the Family. Focus on the Family, one of the biggest of the bigoted organizations that work to destroy the lives of gay people. LGBTQ people. Number 19, as special elections have popped up around the country, Pence has been hitting the campaign trail in support of his fellow Republicans. You can't really criticize him for that. I mean, that's number 20, Pence has been pressuring Congress to implement anti-trans policies in the military. You can criticize him for that. That's pretty vicious. The point that they make is that this matters because Pence might not always be vice president. And so anyhow, there's that. Also, yesterday, the big topic we were asking throughout the day was, who would be worse for America, Trump or Pence? This was all before Trump came out and said, right after I got off the air yesterday, came out and said, that North Korea, if they continue to threaten us, Not if they take action against us, but if they continue to talk, that they are going to see fire and essentially destruction. I mean, he threatened them with nuclear weapons if they don't shut up. Now, keep in mind, this is the guy who, in the transcripts that were released a couple of days ago of his conversations with Malcolm Turnbull in Australia and President Pino Neto in Mexico, in both cases, he begged both presidents to say things or not to say things that would embarrass him. Remember he said to the president of Mexico, you can't keep talking about how you're not going to pay for the wall because it's embarrassing me. It makes me look terrible. So now he is saying to, I think this is a variation of the same thing. He's saying to Kim Jong-un, you quit talking like that because it makes me look bad. And if you don't quit talking like that, I'm going to nuke you. Well, our Ian Millhiser has a great piece over at Think Progress right now about how our nuclear system is designed so that only one man can trigger the firing of nukes, and that's the president. And he can do it in about a 2-minute window. And, at the most, 5-6 minutes for it to be fully implemented. And it's very, very hard to stop once it's started. We need to reconsider this. Serious stuff.